For 30 years, when someone asked me who I was, I gave them my job title. Not consciously, not as a deliberate choice. It was just automatic. The question and the answer so fused together that I never noticed they were two separate things. Who are you? I'm the regional director of operations at. That was my answer. For 30 years. The day I retired and could no longer give that answer, I discovered something that genuinely terrified me. I had absolutely no idea who I actually was. My name is Norman. I am 77 years old. I spent 31 years in logistics management, rose through the ranks in the way that people who are reliable and competent and not particularly threatening to those above them tend to rise. I was good at my job. I cared about it genuinely. I retired at 66. A party, a speech, a watch, the whole ceremony of departure. And then I went home. And the following morning I woke up and reached for my identity the way you reach for your glasses in the dark automatically, without thinking, because it has always been there. And it wasn't there. The job was gone. The title was gone. The role that had structured my days and my sense of self for 3 decades was simply gone. And what I found in its absence was the question I had managed to avoid for my entire adult life. Who am I without the thing? I want to ask you something directly. Outside of what you do for a living, outside of your role, your title, your professional identity, who are you? What are your actual values, as opposed to the values your career has required you to have? What are your actual interests, as opposed to the interests that have been convenient given what you do? What are the things that genuinely excite you about being alive, not the things that make you good at your job, but the things that make you feel like a person? For most people who are deep in their working years, these questions are surprisingly difficult, not because they are unintelligent or unreflective, but because the work has become so dominant, so structuring of their time, their identity, their social world, that the person underneath the professional has not had much space to exist. You become what you do, gradually, without noticing. And the process is so slow and so rewarded, because being good at your job is celebrated in ways that being a rich and complex human being is not, that most people reach the end of their working lives genuinely uncertain about who they are when the work stops. That was me. And I want to tell you what that experience was like. Not to frighten you, but to give you enough warning to do something about it before you get there. The first 6 months of retirement were the strangest of my life, not difficult in the way that loss is difficult, more like disorienting. Like being in a country where you don't speak the language and cannot find the landmarks you're used to navigating by. My days had been structured by work for 31 years, not just the hours of the job, but the entire architecture of my time. The commute, the schedule, the problems that needed solving, the people who needed managing, the metrics that needed monitoring, all of that was gone. And in its place was something I had no practice with. Freedom. Unstructured. Open. Entirely self-directed time. And I discovered in those first months that I had no idea what to do with it. Not because there was nothing to do, but because every time I tried to choose something to do, something for no reason, except that I wanted to do it, I ran into a wall I hadn't known was there. I didn't know what I wanted. I knew what I was good at. I knew what I was responsible for. I knew what was expected of me in every professional context I had ever inhabited. But what I actually wanted, what Norman, the person underneath the regional director, genuinely desired to do with a free Tuesday afternoon, I had absolutely no access to. I had not asked that question in 30 years, and the muscle that answers it, the one that knows what you like, what matters to you, what makes you feel alive, had atrophied from disuse. I remember standing in my study one morning about 3 months in, looking at the bookshelves. I had books I had bought with the intention of reading them someday. Art books, history books, a novel someone had recommended years ago, a book about woodworking that I could not even remember buying. And I stood there for a long time looking at those books, not reading them, just standing there, unable to choose. Not because the choice was difficult, but because the choosing, the act of selecting something for no reason except personal desire, felt foreign in a way I could not explain. My wife Patricia found me standing there. She looked at me for a moment and said, "Norman, are you all right?" I said, "I don't know what I like." She thought I was being dramatic, but I wasn't. I genuinely did not know. Now let me tell you about something that happened 9 months into retirement. A friend invited me to a photography class. I had never had any particular interest in photography. But I had nothing else to do on that Wednesday evening, and I went. And something happened in that class that I can only describe as a reawakening. Not of a love for photography specifically, though that did develop over time, but of a capacity to be interested in something for its own sake, to learn something not because it would make me more effective professionally, but because it was genuinely fascinating. To be a beginner again, incompetent and curious and without any particular destination. It sounds small. It was enormous, because in that classroom, for the first time in decades, I was not performing competence. I was not managing outcomes. I was not being useful or reliable or any of the things that had constituted my identity for 30 years. I was just a person, interested in a thing, for no reason except that it interested me. And gradually, over the months that followed through the photography class and what came after it, I started to find the person who had been underneath the job all along. Quieter than I expected, more curious, less certain, more genuinely interested in things for their own sake than I had ever allowed myself to be when I was busy being effective. It was, in the truest sense, an introduction. At 66 years old, I met myself. I want to talk about something called identity foreclosure. It is a concept from developmental psychology, and it describes what happens when a person adopts an identity, a role, a set of values, a way of being in the world without ever genuinely exploring what they actually are. You take the available identity, the one your background offered, the one your career rewarded, the one your social context expected, and you inhabit it fully without the uncomfortable process of figuring out whether it actually fits. Most people do this to some degree. It is the path of least resistance, and it is not without value. A stable identity, even an adopted one, allows you to function effectively in the world. But the cost of it is the person underneath, the genuine self, the one with its own preferences and values and ways of being that may or may not align with the adopted identity. That self does not disappear. It just goes quiet. And when the adopted identity is removed by retirement, by illness, by circumstance, the genuine self has to emerge into a space it has not occupied in decades. That emergence can be disorienting, frightening, and if you are patient with it, profoundly illuminating. Here is what I want you to take from this. You do not have to wait for retirement to begin the process of knowing yourself. The question, "Who am I outside of what I do?" is available to you right now, today, at whatever age you are, and beginning to answer it now, while you still have the work to sustain you materially while you explore, is infinitely less disorienting than confronting it at 66 in an empty study with no idea where to start. The work is not the enemy of self-knowledge, but it cannot be the substitute for it. Here is what I found underneath the job. A man who was genuinely curious about the world in ways his career had never quite accommodated, who had an eye for composition that the photography class revealed and that had apparently always been there, who liked learning things for their own sake with a pleasure that pure professional development had never quite replicated. A man who was, without the performance of competence required by 30 years of management, actually quite comfortable with uncertainty, with not knowing, with being a beginner. A man who, and this surprised me most, was warmer and more open with people when he was not in a professional role, when there was nothing to manage, nothing to be responsible for, nothing to perform, just a person interested in other people without agenda. I liked that man. I wished I had known him earlier. I wish he had had more space throughout my working life to exist alongside the regional director rather than being suppressed by him. Because the version of me that exists now at 77, retired for 11 years, is more genuinely myself than any version that existed before. And the relationships I have now with my wife, with my children, with the friends I have made since retirement are more real, more honest, more nourishing than almost any relationship I had during my working years, because I am more real in them, more present, more actually me. The job built a lot of things. It also, for 31 years, kept me from meeting myself. I want you to do one thing. Pick 1 hour this week, just one, and spend it doing something that has absolutely no professional value, something that does not make you more productive, more effective, more impressive, or more anything in a work context, something purely for yourself, for no reason except that it interests you or pleases you or that you want to try it, and pay attention to how that feels. For many people, especially people deep in demanding careers, it will feel uncomfortable at first, unproductive, almost guilty, like you are wasting time that should be going somewhere useful. That discomfort is information. It is telling you how thoroughly you have learned to define your worth through usefulness, how completely the work has taken over the space where a person used to live. 1 hour, for no reason except yourself. And then, gradually 1 hour at a time, start building a relationship with the person underneath the job. Because that person is going to be all you have left when the job is done, and you deserve to know them before the introduction is forced. Tell me in the comments, outside of what you do for a living, who are you? Not the practiced answer, the honest one. If it takes you more than a few seconds, sit with that. Because the time between now and when that question becomes urgent is shorter than it feels.